Good afternoon, and welcome to the Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition first town hall meeting of 2024. We welcome you. We are entitling this the St. Josephine Bakhita Town Hall on behalf of St. Josephine Bakhita, who is kind of the patron saint for human trafficking victims. And if I just give you a little background, I'm not going to read because, Google, you can get everything you need online. But just give you a little background about St. Josephine Bakhita. She is from the Sudan, and she was kidnapped by Arab slave traders, where she, over countless years, was in slave trade and beaten to an inch of her life. And then finally, she had some kind Italian slave owners who left her in a monastery or with some nuns. And that's where she found God, found her mission in life, and did not want to leave. And so she, from that point, kept on being of service to others. She had a gentle spirit. And when we think about what happens to folks that are going into human trafficking, it breaks their spirit. And so by the grace of God, like I say, she found God in the midst of that. And she ended up being thankful for the experiences that she had that she should not have had to endure. But because of that, she found God. So she became a saint in 2000. And actually, her feast day is on February 8th. But this is our first town hall for this year. And so we welcome you. I say Happy New Year, even though we're in the second month. And it's also the start of Black History Month. So anyway, as always, I will start off with a prayer. My name is Kim Limore. I am part of the steering committee for CPMC and your host for today. I will start off with a prayer, introduce our speakers, and we'll go from there. Again, I will start off with a prayer to end human trafficking as shared by the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth in Convent Station, New Jersey. God of freedom, beauty, and truth, we believe that your deepest desire, your most powerful energy, is that all creation might know abundant life. We raise our voices in anguished prayer for our sisters and brothers, women and girls, men and boys, who are modern day slaves. They are your beloved daughters and sons, exploited sexually or forced to work because of human violence and greed. Fill us with your holy anger and your sacred passion, that those who are trafficked might know healing and justice, that traffickers will come to repentance and conversion, that all of us might live in such a way that others are not made to pay the price for our comfort and convenience. Hasten the coming of the day when all people and precious earth itself will be treated not as a commodity, but as a radiant images of your freedom, beauty, and truth. We ask St. Josephine Bakhita to intercede on behalf of all those affected by human trafficking. Again, we pray in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. So today, again, we are discussing or having a conversation about human trafficking. And I'm going to introduce our two speakers, and then they're going to share, and then, the format, come back after they're sharing and take questions. So if you have any questions, please put them down in the chat so that we can address them at the end. Our first facilitator today is Katie Boller Gosewisch. Hope I did that right, or Katie BG, as she said, I can say it. Is the executive director of the Alliance to End Human Trafficking, which was founded in 2013 by a group of Catholic sisters who were committed to ending human trafficking and supporting survivors. Katie brings over 20 years of experience and a great skill to her role, having served as the executive director for two Minnesota-based non-for-profits, Living at Home Network and WeCat, both of which focused on serving vulnerable populations and important access to resources like transportation, safe and affordable housing, and medical care. Also, we have Felicitas Onetti. Felicitas is no stranger to CPMC. She has been here before, sharing her wisdom and knowledge. She is the Anti-Trafficking Education and Outreach Coordinator at the Migration and Refugee Services Department at the USCCB. She was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and she has been drawn to working with immigrant populations. So one of the questions I'm going to just start with and ask them both to share why they are drawn to this work of human trafficking.
All right. Now, so I'm just double checking I go first. Or do we start? Are we both answering this question? All right. Well,
yes, Katie, yes. Both of you answer the questions and then we can come back and start our presentation.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. So first of all, thank you very much to Karen and Kara and Courtney and Kimberly from CPMC for having us. We're very excited to be back. The Alliance is always happy to come and talk. CPMC is a member. I also see from looking at the list of participants, we have several members on today. Felicitas, in her role at MRS, they are also members. So we just are very thankful for all of you and grateful for your interest in this work. So why am I personally drawn to this work? I think it starts with the fact that I was sexually abused as a child. And so protecting kids from all forms of abuse has always been very, very near and dear to my heart. It's a very important, obviously, social issue. We see a lot of sort of the predeterminants of vulnerability to trafficking coming from some of these early childhood experiences that are not what we would want them to be. So for me, that's where it starts. It branches out into my children, wanting to keep them safe and, an overall general, I guess throughout my career has always been focused on social justice-based activities, whether it's been working in the church itself or outside of the church. My goal has always been toward, this sort of arc of justice and really making sure that people, no matter their color, their creed, their I don't know, all the different ways we are different, no matter any of those, that they are safe, that they are protected, that they are given the chance to enjoy a freedom-based, healthy life on an earth that is well cared for. So I guess that's really a very short version of why I am in this work.
Felicitas, you want to share? I think her screen has frozen.
I think you are correct.
So go on, Katie, let's get started. And when Felicitas does her part, things just work out as they need to be.
We will just roll with it. All right. So I think, I was really asked today to talk about the Alliance to End Human Trafficking and its role in the church, in the work toward anti-trafficking initiatives. We, as you said in the beginning of this, when you were introducing me, the Alliance to End Human Trafficking started 10 years ago with a group of 15 sisters from 15 different religious communities. So it wasn't one group, it wasn't one congregation, but rather 15 that came together at the end of President Obama's second term, or maybe it was the start of his second term, to talk about anti-trafficking initiatives. What became really apparent to this group of women was that there really was no central Catholic voice really completely focused and dedicated to ending human trafficking. And while many of their congregations had ministries in this area, there was no really overarching connection between organizations or that really focused on the national scenario. And so the group kept meeting, and there was a steering committee. Although Kimberly was not on our steering committee, she would have been welcomed, I am sure. There was a steering committee of 3, and they really worked together to try and figure out what exactly was needed. And eventually, it became clear that a sort of national organization focused on advocacy at the federal and state level, education and prevention information, and then access to survivor services. So we get a lot of questions about that last one. We do not provide direct services ourselves because we are a national organization, and so we just don't have the bandwidth to sort of provide direct services. But we do have member-sponsored houses, so we have some of our members who are involved in ministries in places like Lifeway Network in New York, Dawn's Place in Philadelphia, Lila Mae's house in Sioux City, Iowa, just to name a few. And we are able to provide resources to those houses, sometimes in different ways than traditional resources might be, whether it's networking or money for capital improvements that's maybe not always readily available, but still very well needed. In order for houses for survivors to thrive. So you fast forward, 2013, we were U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. So we went through a name change that was announced this past September at our 10th anniversary conference. And we decided to go with the Alliance to End Human Trafficking because we wanted our name to sort of really reflect who we were as a membership. And we've grown to the point that we have, yes, over 115 members who are women's, congregations, but we also have over 100 other individuals and organizations, coalitions like CPMC, that aren't necessarily based in the sort of charism of women religious. So we just wanted to be a lot more inclusive. I always think about this as sort of sacramental in nature. We wanted our outer reality, our outer reflection to sort of match up our inner reality. So that's a very, very condensed version of our history. I did provide a sort of resource sheet that I believe Courtney added to the chat. I think it was Courtney or Kara. Put in the chat, and that has a variety of different resources. But to focus more in on January, which is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month, which begins actually January 11th with the National Day of Awareness. Some of you might have seen on social media, that's Wear Blue Day. So next January 11th, actually next January 10th, put in your calendar, wear blue, take a picture, put it on your social media and tag it #WearBlue. And that is something that's actually coordinated by DHS. And every year we have a number of Wear Blue pictures, and I'm forced to take my own picture and post it. So there you go. So National Trafficking Awareness Month starts January 11th. And for us, we sort of take it all the way through February 8th, which is the feast of Saint Sister Josephine Bakhita. We have a number, again, of resources, one of which I put on that sheet of paper, which I'm just going to share my screen very briefly. I don't think it'll be a very long share. Maybe I'll share my screen. maybe I won't. Maybe I can. So this is our website, but really this is the page that has, and I'm not scrolling. I don't know why I can't. Oh, there we go. That has, this is under faith resources. So this would be under what we do and then faith resources.
Wait,
And
Katie is not really sharing.
oh, it's not really sharing.
I don't see yours.
I would about that. Okay. So just follow those links and they will take you to the various resources, one of which is our toolkit that we put together in conjunction with the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, California. They do a fabulous job putting together a prayer calendar. So it starts January 11th and goes all the way through February 8th, again, the Feast of St. Josephine Bakhita, and gives just different prayer intentions throughout that time. I also included a novena for St. Josephine Bakhita that is from the Archdiocese of Hartford, Connecticut. So those are a couple of the different resources that we have. Many of those resources are available in English and Spanish. If you see a resource on that website that you want in a different language, let us know. We have a lot of people who are good translators. And there's a lot on the website itself, but on that sheet of paper in specific toward this month of January and February 8th. Another thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is our connection to Talitha Kum as we march forward toward February 8th. Talitha Kum is the anti-trafficking organization that comes out of the UISG in Rome. So it's really the sort of the anti-trafficking work of consecrated life. And they have been around, I believe they're coming on their 15th year. So they have different networks in all the different countries. There can be one member per country, and we are the US member. And they do every year something called the Marathon of Prayer. So the interesting thing about the Marathon of Prayer is that it happens all over the world. And so I believe it starts off in Australia or maybe New Zealand, Oceania, and sort of makes its way across the world until it comes to us in the US. And I believe the US closes it out. If not the US, then Canada. And that link will be available soon. I have not seen it yet, but they do this Marathon of Prayer in honor of St. Josephine Bakhita. It's a really fascinating thing to watch because there's all these different countries putting on prayer. It is 7 hours. So you might not be able to watch all 7 hours, or you might not want to wake up in the middle of the night, but it usually goes to their YouTube page. And if you go to probably our social media would link out to that as well. But it's very interesting to see what all the different countries are doing in the work to address root causes of human trafficking. So we look at things like migration, we look at climate and sort of natural disasters. We look at the power differential between men and women. We look at conflict. And, there's all sorts of things that are, well, not all sorts, there's several root causes to human trafficking. And we understand that the only way we're going to end human trafficking is by addressing those root causes. But one way of looking at root causes is to see where vulnerability is created. And trafficking really thrives wherever vulnerability lives. And to sort of make the connection for incarceration and detention, those are some very vulnerable populations, whether it's children, whether it's migrants, whether it's someone in jail or prison. There's a lot of vulnerability there. So when you're working with those populations and you're keeping trafficking in mind, it's really important to understand what indicators of trafficking may exist. That's another resource on our website. We have what we call a red flag card. I don't have one with me right handy, but now we're calling them trafficking indicators instead of red flags. But that kind of gives you sort of, things to look for, to be on the watch for. I think if you go through an airport now, you can sort of see some of those things on big boards, or maybe you might see a billboard while you're driving. But this is a nice little thing that you can sort of, it's postcard size, and it gives definite indicators of human trafficking. But when you're dealing with incarcerated or detained populations, it's a very, I don't have to say to anyone on this call that's a very vulnerable time. And it's vulnerable because, first of all, you are not in charge of your own destiny at that point. But when you reenter society, you are still vulnerable. And I think that's where we see a probably marked amount of vulnerability and trafficking is in that reentry process. And that is because you're coming out of detention or jail or prison, and you have no money, you have no job, you might not have a place to stay. Those are huge vulnerabilities. And sometimes you might be the only person who is able to now provide for your kids, or you might have to, you have no way of doing it. And the only way, oh, I'm sorry, did someone say something to me? Kimberly, am I going over? I don't know what time it is.
No, you're fine. You were kind of going in and out of line.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Internet issue.
Okay, so vulnerability, coming out, reentry. Essentially, it's super important to maintain relationships with people who are going through reentry, to be a touch point for them, to see where they are. Are they able to find housing? Are they able to find work? Are they able to support themselves or their children? Are they able to get their children back if they've lost their children in some sort of custody issue? Another area of vulnerability is going to be substance abuse. Substances are used pretty heavily to control people in order to get them to do, whether it's trafficking, labor, trafficking, sex. So all in all, I'd like to just say that these vulnerabilities are where people sort of get entered into the trafficking system. So for me, when I'm talking with Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, I really want to focus on how, we can be of service to you, how we can get involved. If, I know I've talked with Karen and Courtney about the possibility of trainings. If any of, your organization is a member of our organization, and so all of our member resources should be available to you. I really encourage everyone to check out those resources listed. And I really, some of them there's a couple that are specific to prison ministry, both in English and Spanish. And then we also have something called the Stop Trafficking newsletter on our website. And probably November, December, maybe October, we had a whole newsletter on prison labor and what prison labor brings to America. So those are a couple of different resources. I'm just trying to look through my outline of what I was supposed to talk about. And again, we have that toolkit available to you. And I think it's just super important, for those of you who are wanting to lift up survivors, to be aware of organizations in your community that might serve survivors of human trafficking. That's going to include not just, houses for surviving or trafficking survivors, but it's also going to include places like domestic violence shelters. And so, because so many of these things intersect, there's just, things tend to pile on, and we're seeing a lot of domestic violence shelters come and ask us for assistance with training, because that's sort of outside of their purview, but they're seeing a lot more of it. So, I will be on at the end for questions. I am thinking that it's almost 1:30. And so I think I'm 5 minutes over or 3 minutes over.
No, you're good. You are good. So just hang tight for a minute. We're going to let Felicitas chair, and then we'll come back for questions.
Great. Can everyone see me and hear me? I was having some Wi-Fi issues earlier. Great. No, Katie, thanks so much for such a informative presentation. And thank you. Just to echo what Katie was saying is, thank you for this invitation to be here. It's always great to work with Catholic Prison Ministries and the work you all do. So to talk a little bit about how I got into this work, I started to really engage with migrant communities early into kind of my studies and my career. And I think I always framed it in the idea of I was an immigrant myself here to the United States. And so I didn't, a lot of people don't have the same blessings and opportunities that I had. And so advocating for these vulnerable populations was something really important to me. And in a lot of ways, I was very similar to many of the migrant workers that I was working with, but not in the same ways that they suffered. And so I thought that it was always kind of that call to being a Catholic is, walking in solidarity with people, even if we don't share the same story, or we maybe do, but not all the way through. So that just kind of, that mission got really close to my heart. And I decided to become a social worker. So that's what I did. And in a lot of my studies in my career, I had a lot of really unique opportunities to work in a prison, for one, and I did a lot of clinical social work, so more therapy, client focused, just clinician work, which now is very different from the work I do today. And in those situations, I was exposed to a lot of situations within foster care with people with substance use disorders, a lot of violence and domestic violence, as Katie was talking about just now, just shelters, just a lot of the co-occurring issues that we see today with mental health and violence and community issues and social justice. And I think I came to a realization that almost, I think I really came to the realization when I was working in a prison as well as working in a rehabilitation, like housing, I'm trying to frame the right word, like a women's like rehabilitation services house, where I had many clients, and there was probably 40 of them, and they had a 6-month minimum of being there. And more often than not, in this program that was provided by the government, they were either federal clients or local state clients that were essentially either finishing their sentences and had to do a rehabilitation program, or were starting off their sentences and also had to do a rehabilitation program. And so with that, I did a lot of therapy and did a lot of group therapy. And as much as it can be quite overwhelming, you can really see how the women kind of find a lot of solidarity with one another from the experiences they all went through differently, but it evidently always came back to one thing. And that's where I really saw how prevalent trafficking was in communities with substance use disorders, as well as violence and just other co-occurring issues and poverty and foster care involvement with child welfare. And just no one would call it human trafficking. It was kind of a different, the reports always say how victims never really consider themselves to be victims. And that's very true because of just the generational kind of norms and the generational trauma and the kind of what we expect, what we learn is kind of our reality. And so just many generational, especially in the nuclear family, of instances of exploitation where a lot of people couldn't self-identify that they were victims of trafficking, but indeed very much were. And so I started to really focus on the human trafficking issue when I just saw how, as a social worker in that capacity, almost every issue kind of really led to victimization. If they weren't already victimized, the increase in risk was that much higher. So that's how I got into this work. I hope that was clear for people. I don't know if that was confusing or anything, but I'm here to share a little bit about St. Josephine Bakhita. As it was mentioned, I work for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and we host a lot. We celebrate a lot feast days, right? That's something that's very important to us. And the feast day of St. Josephine Bakhita is probably one of the just ones that has grown a lot in the past couple of years as well. Pope Francis has been very dedicated on the issue of the World Day of Prayer on human trafficking with Talitha Kum and other organizations such as the Santa Marta Group. The Santa Marta Group comes straight from the Pope's office of connecting civil society, law enforcement, as well as like civil society, law enforcement, and the church to combat human trafficking. And so we just see the involvement of the Vatican there. But so while the church recognizes, of course, the importance of National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, which Katie was talking about, which was the last day was yesterday, right? Because it was in January and here we are in February. It really is such a preparation and kind of really lays that groundwork for the feast day of Bakhita on February 8th, which of course is the Vatican has designated as a day of prayer and reflection against human trafficking. And we also celebrate her feast there. And it really just focuses on that period of preparation for the church in the US as we look to this important day of prayer. Saint Josephine Bakhita is also the patron saint of Sudan, and she is also the patron saint of African Catholics in the United States. So she holds a really special place in many Catholics' hearts, and she just has really been such an advocate, I think, for many different reasons. And so with encouragement from Pope Francis, the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace at the International Union of Superiors General designated February 8th as that annual day of prayer and reflection against human trafficking. And so it really focuses on how, we pray to work together to remove the causes of the disgraceful scourge. And I think Pope Francis once laid it out really well, just that human trafficking is, the crime on the body of Christ. And that really is what we see for victims and survivors. So Saint Bakhita was born, I know Kimberly went over this, but I thought I'd go a little more into detail. But Saint Bakhita was born in the Darfur region of Sudan in 1869 and was kidnapped by slave traders and enslaved as a child. She was walking along with her sister and a cousin from her tribe, and they were walking around kind of some like sweet grass area where there was just a lot of plants, and they were walking from one neighborhood kind of to the other, and these Arabic slave traders actually kind of followed them and kidnapped them. And so they were all separated, and Saint Bakhita was then forced to walk barefoot 600 miles when she was a very young girl, and then was sold multiple times throughout her life in different trading markets and for many different in a lot of like slave owner houses and different forms like that. And so most of her childhood and probably a little into adulthood, she was sold multiple times, and there were a lot of exploitation and abuse that went on in her life. And then the last person she was sold to was this Italian diplomat. And she was sold to him to be, Saint Bakhita was the maiden lady, like the worker, the woman that worked for the wife of this Italian diplomat. So she was just like her maid and the one that kind of helped get her ready and all those kinds of things. And this Italian diplomat, she always mentioned that he was probably one of the nicer ones, and although she was being sold again, there was never any abuse coming from him, or just she felt safer in this house. And the woman kind of mistreated her, maybe not so much physically, but emotionally. And they had to go, the Italian diplomat and his wife had to go back coincidentally to Sudan for some work-related stuff. And they couldn't bring Saint Josephine Bakhita with her. So they put Saint Josephine into the hands of the Canossian sisters to kind of keep her there as like a quick stay until they came back. And the religious, and so these religious sisters kind of took her in and she just helped around. But it was nothing, she wasn't Catholic, as Saint Josephine Bakhita didn't really know God. And I think she always yearned for it, but couldn't really see what that looked like, considering she lived in such a exploitative situation most of her life. And when this diplomat and his wife left, the wife told Saint Bakhita, don't get too comfortable. I'm going to come back for you because you still work for me. And then so they go back to Sudan and do the things that they had to do. And basically these sisters and Saint Josephine just start to really, get along together. And Saint Josephine starts to share a lot about her life, and she helps with cleaning, and she would be the one that would stand at the door, and she would help with cooking and just kind of the duties that happen in a convent. And she starts telling them about their life, and they're like, slavery ended. You can't be a slave. It's illegal. Like these laws have been kind of practiced. And she was like, what do slavery had ended probably 10 years or right when she was captured. But they just kind of, no one was enforcing these laws, and people kind of just lied to her on this exploitation. And she didn't, it's not, even if she knew this information, there was really not much she can do. She was still bought by these Italian diplomats, and what was going to happen. And so these Canossian sisters basically advocated for her, and they took this to court, and they freed her, and they just kind of claimed that she, no one could have, it was illegal for her to be bought to begin with, because even if she was bought, that there was no kind of stand there for that to follow through. And so when the Italian diplomat and the wife came back, she was, she rejected that and said, I'm staying here. And these sisters just really supported her in that. And then she was baptized and received her sacraments and became a religious sister in 1896 of the Canossian Sisters of Venice. And then she really used her story to share this testimony of kind of human freedom and dignity. And one of, I don't recall if Kimberly mentioned this, but one of her famous quotes is, if I ever met my slave traders, I would tell them thank you, because I would have never found God if I wasn't kind of enslaved. And what a beautiful testimony that is for forgiveness and for dignity, and just such a beacon of light, I think, for survivors and victims. And what a magnificent kind of role model. And in October of 2000, JP2 canonized her, noting that in this saint we find a shining advocate of genuine emancipation. And so we use this feast day to really celebrate her and freedom and dignity, and just advocating for victims in many different capacities, victims of violence and just other forms of exploitation. And a lot of the projects that we do here at USCCB are kind of giving some resources for people to do prayer services on their own. We have some like intercessions, like the prayers of the faithful, that we have kind of mapped out. We have Stations of the Cross that are inspired by the life of Bakhita. And I can share all those things here kind of in the chat. We also, as Katie was mentioning, we also have a Day of Prayer toolkit where we have some suggestions for social media posts, or just different kind of ideas, what is human trafficking, what are some things to do, how to get involved, kind of on that end. We, of course, also have everything translated into Spanish. And we have an image of the prayer card. So if anyone is interested in those prayer cards, I can send them. This is the image that we have now. I hope you can all see it there. But if for those that are interested in that, I would be happy to send the PDF over. And then as we kind of prepare for the feast day, we are going to be doing an in-person event here in Washington, D.C. for those that are close by. I think that's a great opportunity for you to come to Catholic University of America, where we are going to have a mass and an interfaith panel discussion, kind of have these Christian faith leaders give reflections on, the calling of the church and why this is an important issue. And we are having members of the Like House, the Bauman Scholars from Georgia, come up and sing and kind of do a concert. So that is very exciting. And for those that are not local to the area, we will live stream all of it. I can include the links here. For those, there's one for the mass, and then there's one for the prayer service. So it's just registering for those, and you'll get the live stream kind of link. And then as we prepare for, I feel like everything's coming by so fast, right? We have feast day, and then it's Ash Wednesday, and then we have Lent, and then it's New Year's, right? That's how it goes down most of the time. So as we, of course, kind of wrap up on the feast day next week, the following week is Ash Wednesday, and so we are also doing some Lent campaigns and bringing back some of the work that we used to do. So we are going to be doing some advocacy-related stuff and doing some kind of postcards. So those will all be available online. And for anyone that has any questions, you can of course email me, and I'm happy to send over those resources. But we have we recently updated and kind of created a new website on our Justice for Immigrants page, because we are in the Department of Migration and Refugee Services. So we are really working to upload all of our documents and everything that is needed on that website. So I can put that website here for those that you can just see everything. The toolkits are there, the prayer cards are there, kind of all that stuff. And I always invite everyone to We have started with a working group, a St. Josephine working group. We have started a monthly prayer service where we talk about different co-occurring issues, such as what Katie and I have both discussed here, that occur with human trafficking. So it's a quick lesson as well as just some prayer intentions, and it's virtual. And it is on the 8th of every month at 2 p.m. to kind of honor that Bakhita feast day. And so it's a reoccurring Zoom link, and I can include that here as well. But it should be on our website for those that are interested in participating. And I think that's all. And I know that we're running out of time, so I'll cut myself off there.
No, we're doing good. You're okay. If you had anything else you needed to share, we will go to any questions for Katie or Felicitas. You could write it in the chat, or I don't know if I can see everybody to raise your hand, ask your question. And while we're waiting on somebody to ask a question, in Chicago, we have a lot of migrants nowadays being shipped here from Texas. And I'm not sure how they're being protected from potentially those that might want to traffic them. Any suggestions as to places to maybe refer them to? We had a lot here at our church that come, looking for resources. But maybe there's something we can put together in Spanish, of course, because they don't speak English, and it's very it's out of their element being here in Chicago because it's very cold and just looking for the things. So they might end up getting lured into things that they didn't necessarily want to do. So I guess I'm asking, is there anything or any resource that you know of, maybe even here in the city of Chicago, that we could refer them to?
So for my part, I'm actually we had a couple of speakers from the Heartland Alliance, which is part of the National Immigration Justice Center in Chicago. That would be a really great place to start. And Heartland Alliance, those are people that we worked with to do some, sort of education around trafficking at our conference. I think I'm going to just put this in the chat. That would be a really good resource for area churches. Also, the National Immigrant Justice Center would also be something that, might want to reach out to. It's a tough thing when you have, I feel like this whole busing of migrants is just yet another way to traumatize people who are probably already traumatized to start with. And so, when I keep hearing stories about this, I think you talked in your opening prayer about that sort of righteous anger, and that's sort of what gets stirred up for me. I see, them, they're people, they're not pawns in some political game, and whether they speak English or not. And it's very saddening to me to see that. And so as many churches as can open their hearts and their arms and their wallets to help people, I really would reach out to Heartland Alliance or the National Immigration Justice. I'm not sure if it's immigration or immigrant. It might be Immigrant Justice Center, to see what they can, offer as far as that's concerned.
Thank you.
Also, I'm sorry. Also in Chicago, there's Lawrence Hall Youth Services. Maryville also has some resources as well. Maryville is actually Catholic. Lawrence Hall is not, but I have a great love for Lawrence Hall, so, and Maryville for that matter.
Okay. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, I think Katie covered that. I found, I think you highlighted some of those organizations that do some stuff. But I highlighted, this was sent to me recently with just some of the migration stuff we do, and it's the Illinois Department of Human Services has made like kind of an Excel sheet there that has all the organizations that are serving migrant communities. So hopefully that's helpful.
Okay.
And I know that there's a coalition as well. Katie, I don't know if you know anything about that. I think there's a coalition too on migration related topics that advocate for like refugee rights. So I assume they would have some information as well.
You know, I think one of the problems is they are so scattered all around the city. And so, you know, it's the, you know, I know there's these intake centers, but they're not necessarily everyone going through those intake centers. Or if they get referred out, then they end up being, you know, they just kind of, you know, they wander around the city, you know, looking for clothes, looking for food, looking for
and that's that
transportation cards and stuff.
Yeah, that's that vulnerability where, you know, they're in a strange town, in a strange city, they might not speak the language. I mean, that ratchets up their vulnerability pretty exponentially.
Exactly. So, okay. Any other questions? We have a few more minutes before I do announcements, maybe a minute or so. So if you have a question, either please raise your hand or put it in the chat real quick. Let me see.
Well, is it possible to, how do you just get in audio here or what?
Works.
Pardon me, I'm sorry, we can hear you.
Can you hear me
Yes.
now? Am I asking the question or?
Yes, we can hear you.
You know, I was concerned, you know, there's a lot with the organization, the different people involved in it, seeing it and doing all this thing. But when I'm thinking, if you get 1,000 people as an example coming in through the doors and they're, if the actual perpetrators, the ones that are actually doing the trafficking are taken into custody, now you got just a whole bunch of people just standing there looking at each other. No food, no shelter, no warmth, no anything. These are the things, not just a whole bunch of prayer cards and just understanding like who's in charge of all the different groups and organizations. We're talking about, how about actually having a place where we can bring these people? I mean, if they actually have a spot, you notice that they're getting off the bus and no place to go. Like, where can they? A shelter set up. You got so many vacant factories and things where perhaps even a tent homeless shelter or something could be set up. But instead, they just turn them out into the street with nothing. I don't know. My heart just goes out for them, you know, and I don't know exactly what to do. They come to the land of opportunity and there are no resources. Occasionally, as I get off the highway here in Glastonbury, Connecticut, nearby where I live, there's a young lady there. I usually, I try to give $5 or $10 as I go by to her, but she's homeless, lives in a tent, you know. And there's no place that I can just say, get in the car, I can take you here, and have her be there and have a place where she can be, you know, where it's going to be safe. She's got food. She's got a place for the washroom facilities, you know. I have no idea how the people survive. We say it's a travesty that they're in captivity, that they're being sold as slaves or being sexually abused. And we say it, but what do we do to remedy it? I'm not hearing any of that in the actual discourse of your conversations here so far. It's basically like who's involved with it in the different organizations and where they can send for prayer cards and all these nice things, you know, but like what gets down to actually having a soup kitchen or a group of people involved, you know, being able to, this is a place where we can bring them. I know in California, I believe it was a thing where when Japan had kind of implemented their attack. We rounded up in the America. They wound up bringing them all to an actual, like a military base. They actually set up like a tented captivity. I forgot what you call it, but it was not a, it was a containment center kind of a thing, you know. But at least they all had supervision. They were all under security. You know, we have a National Guard not called upon at all. You know, if we could just, I was involved in a Boy Scout National Jamboree, Colorado Springs, right there in the desert at the foot of Pikes Peak. There were thousands of acres there, and it was just all campsites, and they all gave us scouts a place to set up a tent. There was a place where we could meet at times, some food distribution points, and we could kind of take care of ourselves. We gained a bit of independence there, you know, in a way, even though we were relying on other people to provide these services, you know. But if we're going to get them out of the captivity, out of the slavery, out of the sexual abuse, where do we put them? The people that got them there, we got to get them into some of the prisons that I don't know, or deported, something. It's a real travesty there that seems like everybody's getting away with and nobody's really there. And I don't know what I can do besides just complain, you know.
Katie,
Thank you, Michael, for your question. But it does, you know, we are working. I think people are working on things. It's just that, you know, it's such a more complex problem than to just have a place where people can go. But I think it takes really all of us to do our part as being Christian, to do what we need to do at a grassroots level to even to address the issue too. Felicitas, I'm sorry, you're going to say something.
No, Katie, I know you want to go ahead. You can go first if you want to say anything.
I had all sorts of thoughts as you were talking, Michael. I appreciate your comments, because it is incredibly important that it's not just paying lip service. You know, we do a lot of advocacy work. We are trying to, I mean, sort of, I don't even know what I would call it, mess, perhaps, would be the most accurate way to talk about it. But one of the things that can almost always get bipartisan support is help for anti-trafficking work. But that's sometimes just a Band-Aid. So what we really need to look at are these systems, these root causes, what is happening in our communities and around the world, you know, in countries of origin where people are migrating. Why are they being forced to migrate? What is creating these experiences and environments for people that we talk about? We're doing a huge project right now on forced migration and human trafficking. And one of our sort of catchphrases is that nobody leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. People don't want to leave their countries of origin, but they have to survive. And so, you know, yes, what are we doing? We have all this space, we have all these opportunities. What we don't have is a lot of willingness for people to not be comfortable. We have a fear of not having enough, a fear of, if I give something to somebody, they're going to get something of mine. It's sort of like, you know, human rights is not pie, you know, we're not going to run out. So yeah, it's not about just platitudes. It's not about just prayer cards or prayers or thoughts and prayers, but it is something that everyone can do. So that's something. But I think we have to get to the point as a society, whether it's a global society, a national society, a state society, a county society, that we need to make these conditions go away. And until these conditions go away, we're not going to end trafficking. And so that's why we are working on these root causes, and on prevention education. You know, a lot of trafficking happens to kids. We're seeing a lot of online grooming. It's a hotbed of conversation at Congress right now. And so what are we doing to help them? We're not, all we're doing is giving them more ways to be trafficked. We're not really giving them the tools they need to know when they're being groomed. So
Okay.
this is a whole lot of conversation.
I know. We could kind of go on and on. That's why we've had several sessions on this. So I guess, the conversation will continue as we go forth also. Again, I thank Katie and Felicitas for sharing on today. We thank you for spending time with us on today. We thank you again, Katie and Felicitas. I know we'll see you sometime again during this year. Your information has been very helpful. So again, we thank everyone and go forth. Don't forget about the resources about the Saint Josephine Bakhita prayer service and things happen at USCCB on next week. And just continue to pray, like I say, and see how you, as a follower of Christ and disciple of Christ, can go about and be the change that we're trying to suggest. Thank you again, and be blessed.